This is Moments with Foo with James Foo Torres, better known as Foo, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet, hear their stories, and get the most important business lessons they have learned on their road to success, and get exclusive advice on how to implement their success into your life and business. Moments with Foo is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Foo.
Welcome to Moments with Foo. I'm your host, James Foo Torres, but you can call me Foo, hence the name of the podcast. Today I have Bill Conerly. Sorry, I don't know why I struggle with that. And he is an economist, a speaker, a consultant, and a Forbes contributor. And I'm going to let him tell you more about that. But first, Bill, how are you?
I'm great, Foo, having a great week, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, I am. I mean, just starting out, right? Like it's Tuesday, but it's been good. So it was a good Monday. Sometimes Mondays can be overwhelming, but it really was good. Things are moving, so I'm excited. And we're both here in Oregon, so it's gloomy days, but at least it's green, right?
True.
Anyway, so let's kick it over with a quick introduction about yourself and your practice.
Yeah. Well, I fell in love with economics when I was 16 years old. Had a head for mathematics, but I thought math was boring, was interested in the real world, but like political conversations seemed to lack a foundation. And when I discovered economics, I'm like, oh, this is using mathematical style reasoning, but about the real world, about business, about public policy. And I've done a wide variety of things in the economics area, but what I really enjoy is helping business leaders understand how the economy is impacting them and what should be at the top of their to-do list.
Awesome. And that's amazing because I come from a background that I always, and I'm still to this day, like math and science was like my favorite things, right? Yeah. And now as a publicist, or like PR strategist, in this PR world, I don't use too much of like the math, except obviously there's always data and comparing those things. But I really liked when I was in college, I took microeconomics and also macroeconomics. Yeah. And I really liked them, especially the micro. And I guess, that's why I'm a business owner too. Like I really like that, the offer and demand and all that. Like I really dig into that and really like this. So I'm really looking forward to the advice that you're gonna give us, because I know that I can get some very good information from you. So now the economy, everybody has a concern about that. So having an economist that writes for Forbes, that talks directly on how the economy affects business, is perfect for this podcast. So thank you for taking this time. On that note, so what is some, based on what you're seeing as an expert on this field, how are you seeing the economy affecting business owners right now, and what do you see the trend to be for this year?
Well, Foo, it's kind of tough to say how the economy is affecting, business, because businesses are so different. If you have been, say, originating mortgages and helping people refinance their mortgages, you had a great couple of years, but the last 6 months have been a disaster. But if you're in healthcare, everything is still busy. So one of the things I recommend business leaders understand and think about is just where they stand in the economy. How cyclical is their industry? People in construction know that it's a boom bust sector. Manufacturing tends to be that way. Services tend to be more steady. And most business leaders know this, but sometimes there's a cacophony of data coming in and they don't quite remember where they fit in the grand scheme of things. Like we've had rising interest rates, right now. For those who are looking at this recording later, it's February 2023. We've had rising interest rates for almost a year. And some industries are very, very sensitive to rising interest rates. I mentioned mortgage brokerage, but housing construction. Housing is the ground zero on interest rate effects, but also business capital spending, non-residential construction. And what I work with business leaders to remind them of, they know how cyclical their industries are. They've lived through it, and they tend to have a gut feel about whether they're early stage, that is very sensitive to the economy, very sensitive to interest rates. So that's the first stage, or if a later stage of effect where you get the ripple effects. Interest rates have messed up housing, and then there are ripple effects to the whole economy. But what I have found is that when I ask business leaders these questions, they understand where they fit. But in an everyday environment, there's just so much news. The trade deficit is up this morning. Well, for most businesses, that doesn't make a bit of difference, yet it's information coming in and people are saying, oh, maybe I ought to think about this, or a recession forecast, and with all of this economic information coming in, what I find is business leaders need help thinking through what's important to them and what's not important to them.
Yeah, I mean, that, and I guess that's where like the consulting and also like the speaker comes into play, right? Like as an economist, you're in it, right? Like you're there, like you're studying this. You told me, right? Like you look at data all the time, so you're keeping up with everything on a very like high level, because I mean, as an expert, as a subject matter expert, right? And then you kind of translate that. Okay, what does this really mean? Not just like the clickbait news thing, right, that like they just want to get views and stuff, right? Of course they're gonna say, oh, look, I do it too with my content. We all do it. Like we want to be polarizing and we want to do this thing. So it's good to have somebody that can digest that, right, and then bring it into very actionable and practical, not just like just saying things. And that's pretty cool. So that I can see how that, when you're speaking, you can give perspective, and when you're consulting, you can actually, get in and, do stuff and really push people in the right direction and what this really means, rather than just be scared and just scrambling, right? So I see that.
And that's a good point, Foo. Humans evolved to avoid threats. And somewhere in our brain, the reptilian side of our brain, we are very alert to a rustling in the bushes that might be a snake or a tiger or something. And the people who were not worried about that, they did not live long enough to pass on their genes to the next generation. So we are all the descendants of people who were very nervous about little noises, could be bad news. And we tend to be less focused on the good news. And as a result, there are a couple of problems here. One is that we will be more alert to bad news. Now, some people are optimists. I'm an optimist. And when I see good news, I'm like, yes, it reinforces, my feelings. And but we all tend to have a bias, more often negative, but sometimes positive. And not only that, if we work with subordinates, people working with us, the subordinate knows the boss's bias. So if the boss has a bias to say, oh, things are going bad, then the subordinates are not going to be bringing good news into the boss, because that's not what the boss wants to hear. You don't want to contradict the boss. So the subordinates tend to reinforce the boss's prior beliefs, which means that the boss really isn't getting any outside input. So that led me to wonder, well, what do you do if you're leading an organization and you've got your own biases? The people who work with you know your biases and try to reinforce those. How the heck do you get information about what's going on? So I developed the idea of an economics dashboard, where a company says, oh, what industry am I in? Who are my customers? What drives their customers to buy? And then the dashboard lays out, I need to look at this. I need to look at that. I need to look at this other thing. But there's a whole bit of information I can ignore. And I should ignore, because it'll fill my head with irrelevant stuff.
And is this something that are you using like a software or like what are you doing for this? Because I'm guessing you know when you consultancy work, you
Oh,
implement these things, right?
this is my software. It's kind of soft. It's a pad and paper, you know. So I was working with a guy and a service company, you know, 30, 40 employees. And we talked about who buys their service and what motivates the customer to buy the service. And we then identified economic drivers. It's not all the economy, but the economy is a lot. So what would we want to see in the local economy that this company serves? What would we want to see in the local economy that would be optimistic? What would be negative? And then we have a dashboard, and it's something that the person can review every quarter. I think every 3 months is a good pace for an economic update. And, you know, it varies. One of the things that I add to the conversation that the typical business leader maybe isn't ready to do, him or herself, is I know all the data sources. And sometimes there's an industry specific data source, but most of the data that business leaders need is published by the federal government. But if you're not used to knowing, hey, this is where I get industrial production data, this is where I get retail sales data, this is where I get inventory data, it's kind of hard to navigate that. And that's something that an experienced economist adds to the mix.
Yeah, and obviously like not only look for it, but also know how to interpret it, right? And how to like decide, like you said, like this is something you should put attention and put it not. And just curiosity, when I was saying like the software, so what is this dashboard? Like you say, like do you present to them? Do you present them like an Excel sheet or like
Yeah, and I like charts. And I think that gives me a good understanding, gives people understanding. I will see a newspaper headline that, have you ever wanted to like murder a headline writer? You know, that happens to me periodically. Oh, and I saw a Twitter post about a headline in which they said the Grammy Best Song winner is an unknown artist. Well, it was Bonnie Raitt, announced just, you know, a day or two. I've been listening to Bonnie Raitt since, you know, I was a young guy. How can they say she's unknown? Anyway, I see this in economics. I'll see some variable is going up, up, down a little bit, up, down a little bit, up. And then it takes another little tiny blip downward, and the headline says, major drop. And I'm like, you know, look at the chart, man. You'll see what's the normal wiggle and what's the trend. So I like charts. And in fact, I've got a newsletter that I put out in graphical format. Those watching the video can see what I do. I just sort of do a graph and then add some comments. So I really like putting charts up to figure out what's a little wiggle and what's a real trend.
Yeah, I mean, we are, as humans, majority of us were very visual learners. So when you make it, that's why I was asking about the dashboard, because I'm a very visual person and most people are. So like being able to understand, because the dashboard is something that you can easily see, right? It's just like here, right? I don't have to dig too much. So
Yeah.
That's pretty cool that you know, for the people watching the video, and if you're watching the audio, like you're gonna like check it out. It's you just show a couple of charts, and yeah, that's a great way to kind of see that, right? And
yeah, and you know, I was talking to a business leader he was running about a $4 billion organization. We were talking about dashboards, and he says, yeah, I want something simple. I don't want something like a 747 dashboard. But I'm thinking the organization that he's running is more complicated than a 747. It's got thousands of people working, different revenue sources, different costs. I mean, don't simplify it too much. What you need is the big picture, but you also need the ability to drill down on those areas. So I was talking to an economist working at a fast food chain. And I'm like, okay, what do you do? And she says, okay, well, if we see that sales are up, My first question is the average customer spending more when that customer walks in, or are there more customers going in? We economists call that the extensive margin, the intensive margin, but it's a bigger ticket sale or more customers. And that sort of says what your marketing program is doing. Is your marketing program getting people to buy the extra bacon and the big shake instead of the cheap soft drink? Or is your marketing program getting more people to come in and try? And being able to drill down. Sometimes at a large corporation, it's not the CEO's job to do the drill down, but the CEO needs to ask the right questions and have people who can do it. Or in a smaller company, the CEO needs to know when to go drill down and say, we need to learn more about this customer segment or this cost element. And Foo, you have as much experience probably as I do talking with young entrepreneurs, getting started. And what it seems to me, and tell me if you agree with this, that it's a real judgment call. Some people dive into the data so much that they don't get anything accomplished, paralysis of analysis. And other people don't look in when they should. What's been your experience? How does a business leader do a good job there?
So data is important. You should definitely look at it. But like you said, like just there's being in any extreme is always bad. So you always have to just consume as much as you need to be able to take action and then keep testing. And also it's there's a lot of things that are like numbers are not everything, right? Like there is other factors. For example, in PR, there's this thing that we call the dark funnel. And that's something that is being used not just on PR, it's also being used just in general marketing, because nowadays, like with content, with podcasts and doing your own, and then from other people, you can get into places like so many different ways that the data doesn't accurately represent how the sale was actually made. Just because they came through Google doesn't mean that it was SEO, because it could have been that someone listened to a podcast, that podcast got sent to a Slack channel, that the board of directors got it from that Slack channel, and now they Google because they remember the name and then just put the name, and now they got there. In reality, the SEO, it wasn't like that big of a deal, only that obviously that when they type it come up, but if they put the perfect keyword, like they're gonna come up, right? So is the equivalent, that's kind of how I compare, given my expertise and how I compare with what you were saying of like not necessarily all this data, it means like just numbers. It's like, oh, there was a pandemic happening, so obviously like stuff is gonna happen in that economy, not necessarily that we have a bad economy, right? So that's what my take on that.
Yeah, and that is consistent with my own experience. When people call me up and say, hey, our board of directors is having a meeting, can you come in and speak? I'm like, well, how did you hear about me? And I get a lot of head scratching. They don't, sometimes they do, but oftentimes it's like my name came up in a conversation, they saw an article that I wrote, and then somebody forwarded my newsletter to them, and they're like, oh yeah, that's the guy. So all I know to do about marketing is do a whole bunch and don't expect any one thing to work.
Exactly. So that's what I really like. I really like what you're doing. Being a speaker, being in podcasts like this, writing for Forbes, and just kind of like combining that. Like you're also like, I found you on LinkedIn, right? So having all those different pieces that are authoritative, also being as digitally omnipresent as possible, and then giving constant value with your newsletter that has very like, you want to just right now, for example, you're a business leader that you want to get the information for an economist. I will put the link here for the newsletter, so then you can just sign in, and then now like you don't have to worry about like, oh, what the news are saying about the economy, how it affects you. Yeah. You get them right digested there for you. So as long as you give a lot of value and you are very intentional about positioning yourself in to leverage as many platforms as possible, like you're doing, right? Like you're leveraging all these different platforms. That's what I really advise to my clients. So, that's why, like, I got suggested, somebody mentioned your name, and a friend of mine. And then that's how I was, because it was not just you, like we were like talking about a couple of people, and then your name came up. How did he find you? I don't even know, right? Like it was just, your name. Then I Googled you, I checked your stuff, and I really liked it. We connected, and then boom, like we're here, right? So it's about just putting as much of yourself out there, and do it strategically, and most importantly, just give as much value as possible. Because when you give everything, like literally, like just give everything from what you're doing in the background, everything, then just sell implementation to people. Knowledge, information's out there. Just be that asset for them, and then they'll find their way to you. That's
right.
it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I do, maybe this is going off track a little bit, but
That's fine.
I get a lot of benefit from the people I talk to about the economy. So I was in Laguna Beach. Nice presentation, Western bankers, talking to bankers. And officially, I was there to help them understand how the economy would impact banking. But every conversation I had, well, how's business? What are your challenges? What are your opportunities? And then I'll be speaking to adhesives people who sell glue and stick them and that kind of stuff. And I will share with them what I learned from the bankers. And then I will go to some real estate people and share with them what I heard from the adhesives people. And it's like a daisy chain. But I really love talking about the economy. And I pick up a lot of information from talking to business leaders. And that's one of the things that I think is a sign of a good business leader with respect to economics is curiosity. Talking to people, hey, what's going on? What are you seeing? And some of the information is not directly relevant. And perhaps it becomes a part of that cacophony. But I look at statistics a lot, but I really feel that the texture of a conversation, I get a better sense of what's going on than just looking at a number.
100%. And that also relates. I can relate to that because I'm not an economist, but as a PR person, and also like as a podcast host, I'm so curious. Like you can tell, like I was like, oh, what is it about the dashboard and how do you do it and all that, right? Like I'm digging, because I genuinely curious, because I love knowing. And also that's why it's good for the podcast host, because I'm getting this for the audience, right? Like I'm just digging here, right? Like just all like the golden nuggets that I can, rather than here just talk about, oh, how great we are or whatever, right? It's more about like how deep of an information, right? Like how much perspective can we give to people, and how much takeaway, so people come out of this conversation and they feel like they either have something that they can apply, or now something that changed their mindset, that they will change the way that they do or say or think, right, even, right? So that is pretty cool. So Bill, I think this has been a great conversation. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to one last biggest takeaways that you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I would say that the key to understanding the economy is knowing what's really important for you to pay attention to. And you probably, I don't know whether you go into bars, taverns, that kind of stuff, but imagine Friday afternoon after work, you go into a crowded tavern and there are a lot of voices, and you go up to the bar, you're hearing conversations all around you, but you don't really hear the conversation. It's just noise. But in my case, if somebody starts talking about sailing, which is what I like to do, all of a sudden I hear that conversation and I don't hear anything else. I have a friend who will hear the golf conversation. My wife will notice a Scandinavian accent. I have a son who will pick up on AI conversations. We all are sort of attuned to different things. So I think of, suppose you walk into the economics tavern with all of these economists talking about the latest numbers. It's just noise, but a business leader should know which conversations should perk perk his or her ear up. And if you're selling to people whose income depends on dividends, oh, well, let's listen to this conversation. But if you're selling to everyday working people, let's listen to that conversation. And think of that as how you filter through all of the economics news that you get, what is particularly relevant to the organization that that you're running. And one last thought, I think the economy is tremendously important, but the economy is not your destiny. You know, a business leader's destiny is how well customers are served in terms of getting what they want and how efficiently they're served so that the costs of serving the customer are not too high. That is the destiny. The economy is simply the environment in which you pursue your destiny.
Yeah, I completely agree. You can, I have my client, David A. Perez. He's a tax strategist, and he has his movement, and the name of his book is called Build Your Own Economy. And that is based on living life on your own terms, and regardless of what the economy is doing, you can always do things to stay ahead, right? And if you're always being proactive rather than just waiting until things happen, you can always be ready for whatever the economy throws at you. That's why he says, like, you know, build your own economy. So it goes very, very good with these things. And also, like, I was looking at my notes that we were talking on the last conversation, is like noise versus signal. Right. I like noise like that. And I asked you, I was like, what do you mean exactly? Right. And what he told me was it's noise, you know, let's say compared with radio, right? It's like, oh, that static, like, you know, like, but then the signals when you're actually picking up a station, right? So then it's just be aware that you know, be a radio that's picking up the signal rather than the noise. Right. So that's kind of what, and you told me that you were thinking about doing a Forbes article about that. So, like, are you working on that? Just curious. Yeah.
It's probably going to come out either end of this week or early next week. So
nice. So
you know, if you just Google my name, Bill Conerly, and Forbes, you'll come up with my articles, and there I am.
Awesome. Is there any other way that you like people to find you?
Yeah. You know, the economics newsletter is probably the best way for most people to look at me. And if you just Google my name, Bill Conerly, Conerly Consulting, Mr. Google knows how to spell my name, even if you don't. And you'll find my website, ConerlyConsulting.com. And then there's a newsletter sign-up sheet there. I'd be happy to share that with all of the viewers here.
Yeah. And if you I don't know if you already submitted that link already for my admin, but if you haven't, then just make sure that you send that to me. So we make sure we put it in the description. So that way we can people to do that, because that's pretty interesting. And I think, you know, my audience is kind of perfect, right? All business leaders. So I think that's very fitting. So thanks for taking the time, you know, like, you're so busy doing all these things, and I, you know, given that you're local, so hopefully, you know, we can meet in person and maybe even record in person later, right? Well, we talked last time, so
we can go to that tavern,
right? We're going to do the Economist tavern, right? Oh, well, we can do something. I'm doing an in-person podcast. My first one actually is gonna be next week, here in Hillsborough, because it's in the wine country. So we're gonna be on a winery. We got getting with videographer. We got another marketer that I'm gonna be doing the podcast with. So if then maybe we can, instead of a tavern, well, we can do wine, right? Like that's
that works for me.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, I'll keep you posted on that. But you know, again, thanks for taking the time. This has been fun, a lot of information. Never had an economist here, especially with that perspective, working with business owners. So thank you for the valuable content.
Great chatting with you, Foo.
Yeah. So this was Bill Conerly and Foo, and this is us signing off.
Thanks for listening to Moments with Foo with your host, Foo. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.